Okay, so my name is Holly Spoth Torres. We've got some logistics things going on right now, which I'll tell you what's going on. I'm a consultant working for DNR. I'm logged on to this meeting, but I'm going to be speaking through Shelby's computer. So you'll see Shelby's little face lighting up when I'm speaking. Okay, I'm going to introduce some other DNR staff who are in the room today. A bunch of us are in the same room. First of all, we have Monica Alvarez. She's the manager for the RADS division. She's in the room. Actually, I'll let Rob introduce himself. So go ahead, Rob.
This is Rob Earl, and I'm the lead planner on this project.
Okay. Do you want to say something? No. Yeah, go ahead.
Nope. Just
okay. And then Shelby, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Shelby Burridge, also a planner for DNR.
I'm Candy Snow. I'm with the DNR South Central Regional Land Office in the permitting unit.
Okay, so that's the DNR staff we have here today. The point of today, and thank you for attending, the point of today is to give you a brief presentation on the Matanuska Valley Moose Range and Jonesville Public Use Area Management Plan Public Review Draft. We find that it's important at this stage to invest a little time and energy in giving you a presentation on what is included in the draft, public review draft, because it's a lot, right? It's like over 100 pages. There's a lot of things that happen in there. And we find that if we spend a little time at this stage giving you a little bit of a primer, that it helps guide your public comments. And it helps you focus on what's important to you so that your comments can be more informed. So with that, we're going to go through some really high level stuff about the plan, and then we'll get into some of the details that will focus you on that'll help you provide your comments. Okay. Okay. Help me. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to go through, introductions. Yeah, we've already done that. Then we're going to go through a high-level overview of the plan and why we're doing it. We're going to talk through the organization of the management plan so that we can help you focus your comments. We're going to talk about what this plan is going to do, what it's not going to do, and then we'll tell you how to provide comments. So for this online public meeting today, if you have questions during the presentation, if you could please hold them for us, and we'll get to them after we're done with the presentation. The other thing too is we're not going to monitor the chat until we're done with the presentation. So if you put something into the chat, we're not going to get to it until we're done talking, but you're welcome to get your question in there beforehand. It's just we won't respond until we're done talking. Okay. All right. Overview. Matanuska Valley Moose Range Management Plan. The image on the right probably looks familiar to you. That's what the plan looked like in 1986, over 30 years ago. The Matanuska Valley Moose Range is what we call an LDA, or a legislatively designated area. And the Alaska statute that established the Moose Range is listed right there. That would be something that you could go and research as part of your comments. But I'm going to briefly talk about what the statute says, the purpose of the Moose Range. Okay, that's really important. The Moose Range was established to maintain, improve, and enhance moose population and habitat and other wildlife of the area. So that's like the primary reason the Moose Range was established, for moose habitat, right? Additionally, one of the purposes of the Moose Range is to perpetuate multiple public uses of the area. So those are the two reasons the Moose Range was established. Okay, now we have another layer of legislation, which is the Jonesville Public Use Area. Again, the statute that established Jonesville is on the bottom there. Jonesville is a little bit different. Its purpose is a little bit different. It was established to address concerns of public safety and to provide a spectrum of public recreation opportunities while maintaining fish and wildlife habitat. So you can see the purposes between the Moose Range and Jonesville are a little bit different. The Moose Range itself primarily is for moose and wildlife habitat, where the primary purpose of Jonesville is really public recreation, okay? So a little bit different. So the thing that's important to note here is that the orange line is the Moose Range line. The red line is the Jonesville line. So the Jonesville public use area is almost entirely within the Moose Range. So there are these two legislatively designated areas that are kind of overlapping. And so it's important to note that although there was a management plan for the Moose Range in 1986, we're now moving forward with one management plan that incorporates both areas. Okay, so that's one important thing to note as you're reviewing the plan. So why is DNR updating the Moose Range Management Plan? There's a handful of reasons. Importantly, much has changed in the 36 years since the Moose Range Management was adopted. There are different land use patterns. There are different transportation patterns. The population of the Matsu Borough is significantly increased, especially impacting the western part of the Moose Range and the pressures that both Jonesville and the Moose Range see in those areas. There's changes in wildlife patterns. There's changes in best management practices for forestry, for fish and wildlife habitat management. So a lot has changed, and it's important to update the plan. In addition to what I just described, there's also that unique overlay of the Jonesville public use area within the Moose Range. So because of that new legislation, it was important for DNR also to update the Moose Range Management Plan to include the legislative direction for Jonesville. So that's the handful of reasons why DNR is updating this plan. Okay, the management plan process. There had been a lot of community involvement prior to DNR initiating a management plan process, so prior to 2022. However, DNR officially launched scoping for the update to the Moose Range Management Plan of October 22, about a year ago. So scoping happened in fall of 2022. And then following after that, we prepared and evaluated different alternatives for the management plan. We worked internally with DNR and Fish and Game to develop an internal draft. Those were reviewed, and now 1 year later, we are going through a public review process for the draft management plan. At this point, we're accepting comments through November 9th of 2023. After which we'll prepare a comment and issue response summary, and then we'll prepare the final plans after that. We'll go through an approval process likely in middle of 2024. And we're reaching for the plan to be adopted in late summer or fall of 2024. Okay. What is a management plan? I think it's important to talk about this because DNR just doesn't do management plans to do management plans, right? DNR is directed by Alaska statute to prepare management plans for the use and management of state-owned lands. It's required. Management plans define the management intent for an area, and it includes both long-range guidelines and management practices, okay, for both Jonesville and the Moose Range. How is this plan organized? I'm going to go through this quickly because it helps you understand how the chapters are organized, because there's actually, through all of DNR's management plans, they're all organized similarly, and there is a rhyme and reason to it, and we'll talk about that so it helps guide your comments. Chapter 1 is an introduction. It sets the planning context. It talks about why. It talks about some overarching goals. If you have a limited amount of time in your life, I would not focus on chapter 1. Okay, there's more guts in chapters 2, 3, and 4. So that's my That's my personal advice to you. And professional. Okay. Chapter 2 is what we call area-wide goals and management guidelines. Chapter 2 will provide guidelines for all of the moose range in Jonesville. Okay. When you start going through the plan, you'll see that it's organized by resource, and those resources are organized alphabetically for your convenience. But it's things like access, recreation, wildlife, forestry, subsurface resources. So again, those area-wide goals and management guidelines will be considered for all of the moose range in Jonesville. Okay, that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 is a little bit different. Chapter 3 defines subunits within the moose range, and it defines management guidelines that are more geographically focused for that subunit. Okay. Those management guidelines are also organized by those same resources that I talked about before: access, wildlife, forestry, subsurface. But again, the subunit management guidelines are intended to be geographically focused and unique for that subunit. And then chapter 4 is the implementation chapter, and it says how things will be accomplished. Okay, what's this plan going to do? Overall, this plan provides guidance to land managers as a variety of management decisions are made for the planning area. DNR, Fish and Game, other land management agencies will use this plan to help guide their decisions and authorizations. Because things that happen within the boundary of this planning area need to be consistent with this plan. Okay. This plan will recommend facilities to meet the current and future needs of the public. Based on some legislative requirements, this plan will identify uses that are compatible and incompatible with each other, or the guiding, the enabling legislation of the plans. It will provide relevant resources so that people who make land managers who are making decisions can base those decisions on the management guidelines in the plan. Okay, so it's going to provide for the management of state land as provided in the implementing legislation. Another thing that's really important that's a requirement of DNR is this plan will classify and or reclassify state land. This plan is going to suggest trails management process and other natural resource protection measures, both in the Moose Range and the Jonesville public use area. This plan recommends designated shooting areas for shooting ranges. This plan will provide the basis for the development of regulations. And this is important. It's important to know when you're reviewing this plan that this plan makes recommendations for future management actions, right? So this plan doesn't, and this is always a hot topic, but I always bring it up. This plan itself, this document isn't going to prohibit shooting in certain places, right? This plan provides the basis for that to happen in the future through subsequent regulations, okay? And then lastly, the plan makes recommendations for limits on certain activities that are more restrictive than generally allowed uses. Okay, what this plan doesn't do. This plan doesn't apply to federal, Alaska Native, private lands, university lands, DOT right-of-way, mental health trust lands. This plan only applies to state land. Management and maintenance and protection of fish and wildlife are the responsibility of Fish and Game. So though this plan makes recommendations for goals for habitat and things like that, is still the responsibility of Fish and Game to manage wildlife. This plan doesn't make any decisions about specific land use authorizations. That's the job of permitters and specific land use authorizations. Doesn't provide any intent for other actions for agencies other than DNR, ADF, and G. And of course, this plan doesn't make any recommendations for the management of subsurface resources. Okay, so we're going to get into some of the management recommendations now. And the reason there's a disclaimer before I do this, because again, there's 125 pages of plan here. And I'm not going to go through every single management recommendation in the plan. That's your job to focus on what is most important to you as a reviewer and somebody who wants to comment on this plan. But what I am going to do is I'm going to highlight the management recommendations in both Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, both the area-wide and the specific units, that are kind of like the primary things we heard out of scoping and the primary things that are different from the 1986 Moose Range Plan. So we're trying to kind of direct your attention to the things that are different and the things that we heard most in scoping. Okay, so Chapter 2, we'll start there. The area-wide management guidelines. So, okay, and bear with me, I have to get to my Chapter 2 in the plan because I'm going to read some of it too. If you're not sleeping yet, I'm going to do a little bit more reading. Okay, so the first thing that Chapter 2 does that's different is it establishes a management guideline for the creation of public use sites. And the reason that's important, let me find it here. And the reason that's important is because public use sites allow DNR to establish a geographic boundary on a place that receives a higher level or more concentrated use from the public for whatever reason. It's usually recreation. So it allows DNR a mechanism to be able to create specific regulations around that site. So here we go. Public use sites are sites that have been identified as particularly important for public access, recreation, camping, fishing, or other recreation or public use. These sites typically have a very high value to the public and see a lot of people there. And so as such, they should receive a higher level of management attention. So DNR would have the ability to not only construct public facilities at these places in order to protect the resource and accommodate a higher level of public use. It allows DNR to potentially restrict camping or put time limits on camping or create restrictions at a public use site that are higher, more restrictive than what you would see typically on the state's generally allowed uses of public land. Finally, public use sites gives DNR the ability to restrict the discharge of weapons or firearms within the public use site or within a distance of the public use site. Okay, so this is one thing that is different from the prior Moose Range Management Plan. There are, in this current draft, there's 3 public use sites potentially identified: Slipper Lake, Eska Falls, and Wishbone Lake. And there's a map in Chapter 3 that identifies those. So, okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, shooting ranges. Although during scoping, we heard the majority of comments about shooting in the Jonesville area, we think it's important that because this is a long-range plan intended, 10, 15, 20 years, probably more, we think it's important that throughout the entire Moose Range, DNR has the ability to designate additional sites for shooting. What we know is that when you restrict a use in one place, or you have the potentially that use could be displaced somewhere else. So allowing shooting ranges throughout the moose range gives DNR the opportunity to provide for that use in a safe place somewhere else, and not just in the Jonesville subunit. Okay, public safety. And I think this is in recreation. Okay, so I'm going to read this one. So area-wide, that means throughout the entire moose range, there's a management guideline that says the discharge of firearms will be limited to designated areas, except if conducting lawful hunting and trapping activities. So that's important for everyone to understand, is that this plan is making the recommendation that the discharge of firearms is limited and restricted to certain areas. Okay. Now, of course, remember that's a recommendation, and actually implementing that would take the promulgation of regulations in the future. Okay, related to that, the plan area-wide makes a recommendation for increased enforcement presence. Again, that's in the recreation public safety section. And then the plan recommends that there's a subsequent trail management plan process to both manage use, protect resources, protect habitat, and provide adequate places for a variety of users to use trails. Okay. Okay, so chapter 3 is where we get into unit-specific management guidelines. So this is the subsurface resources map, and that's not the intent of this map. This was the best map I had at this time to show you the different subunits. The subunits are different in this public review draft than they were in the previous Moose Range Management Plan. I think the only subunit that this is actually the same as the Eastern Management Subunit. But the boundaries of the Western and Middle, and then we created a 4th management subunit, a Jonesville management subunit. So within the unit specific management guidelines, we have Western Management Subunit, which is about, the boundary is approximately Moose Creek on its eastern side. Then there's the Jonesville management subunit. And you'll see that the legislatively designated area of Jonesville is this hatched line, and the Jonesville management subunit is larger than that, but it does include the entire legislatively identified area of Jonesville. Okay, and that's important for a variety of reasons. We're thinking future to helping people in enforcement and understanding where they are in the ground. So that's one of the reasons that happens that way. And then the middle management subunit, the biggest one, and then the Eastern management subunit. Okay. So again, I'm not going to highlight everything that happens in the, I'm not going to highlight every management guideline that happens in the Western management subunit, but I'm going to draw your attention to ones that are maybe important and that we heard a lot about during scoping. Okay, so first of all, in the Western management subunit, there are specific management guidelines identified for a potential trailhead and access improvement at Went Road, which provides access from the western side, from the Palmer side. Okay, so that's one thing that you should review. In addition, there are specific guidelines for the Wasilla Creek Headwaters Trail System. We heard a lot during scoping that this was a critical habitat area, that there was a lot of damage potentially from trail users, and if there is a trail management plan, that there are more specific guidelines for Wasilla Creek Headwaters Trail System. There's salmon there's salmon streams, there's wetlands, and there's a lot of resources that need to be addressed in that, or thought about when thinking about trail access in that area. Okay, Jonesville Management Subunit. Again, oh, and I'm going to back up just one more time. So the other thing that happens in Chapter 3, which is really important for DNR, which is one thing they're required to do, is it provides the basis for designating land and then classifying it. So you'll see here that lands are designated. This is, see, it says W1 here, and it'll equate to this W1 down here. And HA, RD, I know this because we did the work, but in Chapter 3, at the beginning of the Western Management Subunit section, it will define for you what HA stands for and what RD stands for. So HA is habitat, RD is recreation dispersed. Let's see, C is coal, F is forestry. So it's important for DNR to have their lands classified in order to guide future land management authorizations. So I'm not going to continue to go through that. At the beginning of each description of each subunit, it will define what those mean. Okay. So the Jonesville Management Subunit, things to pay attention to. From a recreation standpoint, it recommends developing non-motorized hiking trails. During scoping, we heard a lot that there was demand for that. People want motorized trails, but people also want non-motorized hiking trails to access the mountains. It recommends the public use sites, Slipper Lake, Eska Falls, Wishbone Lake. It recommends facility development at the Slipper Lake campground, in addition to a shooting range, and we'll get to that in a second. And then another thing that's unique about the Jonesville legislation is the Jonesville legislation was very careful about ensuring that all the recreation uses that were occurring there at the time of the legislation were able to continue happening. However, with the goal of public safety in mind, the legislation required that DNR needed to go through a compatibility determination in order to be able to restrict any uses. So what you'll see in Chapter 3 for the Jonesville Management Subunit specifically is a narrative discussion on the compatibility of the discharge of weapons and or firearms relating to all the other uses happening there. So if that is important to you, I would read that section in detail. But that is the basis for being able to restrict uses in the Jonesville area. And I believe the only use that we're restricting at that point is, there's recommendations to restrict camping or time limits on camping, but we're not saying you can't camp anywhere, right? Just like time limits of camping at Slipper Lake. And then it recommends a specific place for shooting. So, okay. The plan goes further to make some management recommendations for a proposed designated shooting area. Shooting area would need to conform to best management practices for shooting ranges, should have specified hours of operation, should be staffed, managed, and maintained, accessible year-round, provide the appropriate barriers and baffling for noise and safety, and then as needed, go through a feasibility analysis. Because although this plan makes a recommendation for a place where a shooting range could be feasible, through future thinking or planning or funding, we might realize that another place makes more sense. So the plan really does outline a process for figuring out where shooting range should go, what's appropriate, and that it's authorized or allowable. I shouldn't use the word authorized, sorry about that, but allowable in the Jonesville unit. Okay. You'll see when I talk, it's not going to take me very much time to go through the middle management subunit or the eastern subunit, because honestly, throughout scoping, we didn't hear a ton of comments about the middle management or the eastern subunit. So just a couple of things to draw your attention to are, we heard a lot of comments about the Chickaloon Connect Nelchina Trail. That trail is important for recreators in the area and want to see its character continued. And then another thing is that when I talk about displacing uses, there could potentially, there's already a lot of use happening at Kings River. Kings River is a place that could continue to see increased use. And the plan does make a recommendation that if needed in the future, DNR could authorize a campground or like a campground that's more managed at Kings River. Okay. And then same thing with the Eastern Management subunit, not a lot of comments. We just did have some comments about the Chickaloon Connect Nelchina Trail and how important that is to people. Okay, we'll talk about how to comment and then we'll let you ask questions as you want. Okay, four ways to comment. Well, in writing via the chat. This presentation was intended for the in-person public meetings where there's comment forms. So you can comment online via the web-based comment portal you can access through the website. You can submit comments via email to that email address there, jonesvillemooserange@alaska.gov. You could send comments in writing to that mailing address listed there too. If anyone needs any additional accommodations to provide comments, please reach out to us. We can help you do that. The comment period is open through Thursday, November 9th. Okay. I guess with that, we'll take any questions you might have that can help guide your comments. You can also put them in the chat. And you can raise your hand and that works too. Or we can all go have lunch.
Hey, Holly, it's Lorelei. I don't have any questions, but just wanted to say thanks for putting on the webinar and really appreciated you walking through everything. And we'll submit comments during this public comment period. Certainly nothing glaring on our perspective. Appreciate what you guys did to make sure that it was spelled out in there that mining rights are still a priority in the area. So thanks for your help on this.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think we would be interested in your comments about the location of that proposed designated shooting area. I think if you could include some of that in your comments, that would be helpful to DNR, I think.
Okay, thank you. I will pay closer attention to that. Thanks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess the last thing I'll say is that we recorded this with the intention of posting it on the web so that if you want to watch it again, or if you know other people who can't make the public meetings who want to watch this, they can go and watch this video. If no one has any questions or comments, we can wrap it up, and you have our contact information. You know how to get in touch with us. We're happy to follow up with you as needed. Okay, we do have one hand up. Richard, go ahead.
Is there any way that this comment period could be extended to December?
So, yeah, so if you wish the comment period to be extended, you should submit that request in writing to one of these. So send an email to jonesvillemooserange@alaska.gov with that request, and DNR will consider it.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, everyone, we're here if you need us as you develop your questions and comments. All right, I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thank you.